Thoughtful Show, final hour here on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. That Odyssey app where you can find the Stinkin' Truth podcast twice a week with our pal Mark Schlereth, who of course was on the call for Fox this past Sunday, the three-time Super Bowl champ, joining us now. Mark, how we doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Things are good. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to have you, and always fun, especially after you have a Commanders game, because I know something you do on the podcast we're going to get you to do here on the radio show as well, which is kind of empty the notebook. You guys have so much that you get from the production meetings. Obviously, you watch the tape, and you have so much going into those meetings. Not all of that is going to make the broadcast. So what are some of the things that you kind of had on your plate going into this game that maybe you're still thinking about coming out, but didn't quite come out in the telecast?
Yeah, some of the things some of the things you just hit on the surface, and there's so much more, that is boiling underneath. So one of the big things for me was just that Kliff Kingsbury journey, and kind of what's different now than was when he took over in Arizona and spent a couple of years coaching in Arizona. And so, one, just sitting down and talking with him, like he's a different dude. Like there's a humility and a responsibility that he's taken for what didn't go right in Arizona. And so, I'm asking him, like, what are the things that you learned, and what are the things you did differently this go around? And I found it really interesting. Like, one, he said, I knew I wanted to work with a young quarterback, but I also knew that when I worked with Kyler Murray the first time, I should have brought in a veteran presence that had, some similarities, that had been through some of the things that Kyler was going to go through. And so right now on their roster, although he's on IR, they brought in Marcus Mariota. And Marcus, much like Jayden Daniels, was a second overall pick, right? Had some success early, but then kind of fell apart and, had his struggles. And Kliff was like, I know how valuable those experiences are going to be, both the good and the bad, and all those different things that a quarterback who's kind of been through it and had high expectations, some of the pitfalls and some of the things that I can hopefully keep my young quarterback out of, falling into. And so having that presence within that room, it was of vital importance to Kliff. And so he wanted to get that done. So he got that done. And then ultimately, that air raid system that he ran in college all those years. And remember, he was with Kyler Murray in college. He was with Baker Mayfield in college. He was with Patrick Mahomes in college. He's got a who's who of quarterbacks that he has worked with in the college game. Just worked with Caleb Williams a year ago before he was the first overall player taken. So he has got this plethora of different quarterbacks he's worked with. And he just talked about the principles of the air raid and spread offenses. And, your top personnel groupings in that offense are always four wides. And so you take that spread principle of offense and you bring it to the NFL. And there's a couple things that I was really excited to hear him talk about. One was always something that bothered me: in shotgun all the time. And there is value in shotgun, but there's also value in being under center and having a tailback dotted in the eye. There's the play action aspect of it that you get so much more run on. Like when you take a ball from under center, turn your back to the defense and go to hand it off, linebackers can't help it, like run up, they're right on you, they're just, And so like the action that you get off of that, how much more open guys are in the intermediate throws. Ultimately, basically not really truly understanding the NFL run game and having the wherewithal to bring in Anthony Lynn, Dan Quinn and Kliff Kingsbury, bringing in Anthony Lynn, who's been a head coach, with the Chargers. He was a teammate of mine with the Broncos. Really, really understands the run game, not only from an X's and O's standpoint, but a mentality standpoint. And to watch them put together and orchestrate a roster which has tight ends that can actually block people. That was not something he had before, right? And getting into 12 personnel and getting into 13 personnel. And some things that people
for listeners that might not know, 12 two tight ends,
Thank you.
3 tight ends for 13.
13, yes, thank you. And so people don't understand like the value of that, right?
Right.
And so one of the things, and I'll just give you a couple of reasons. One, like we got to block edges, right? And we got to be able to take the we got to be able to take the punishment to defensive ends and things of that nature. So it helps in the running game that way to have guys that can block. But the other thing it does for you, and this is the big one, when you're in spread all the time, you get a bunch of exotic blitzes with skinny dudes who can run, and it makes protection harder. There's just so many more things they can do from space and things they can do from a blitz standpoint, that when you condense formations, and this is always a big kind of struggle or fight. Like quarterbacks will oftentimes like spread because they can look at the whole picture and say, oh, I think that guy's the most dangerous, or I think that guy's the most dangerous. But those guys run 4.3 40s, right? I don't. Like offensive linemen don't do that. And so there's value in condensing a formation and getting a lot of fat people on the field, because fat people don't run as fast as skinny people. And there's value in that and understanding that. The other thing that we talked about is in a spread offense, when you get out of rhythm throwing the ball, you know what's really hard to do? Get yourself back into rhythm throwing the ball. We're struggling throwing it. We're going 3 and out. We're not possessing the ball. We're not eating up any clock. And to throw myself back into a rhythm when my quarterback's out of rhythm, when my receiver's out of rhythm, everything is not working. Sometimes the best thing you can do is condense, get in those heavy personnel packages, the two backs, two tight ends, those type of things, and just cram it down somebody's throat. And so there's been this metamorphosis, if you will, this melding together of, spread air raid principles with real live NFL run principles and NFL game planning principles. And it's been this really cool amalgamation of those two things that have come together. And for Kliff to be able to step back from kind of what went on in Arizona and to critically look at yourself and go, man, this has got to change, this has got to change, this has got to change, and then implement those things and be secure enough in you as a coach to say, I'll bring on a guy that was a head coach and an offensive coordinator and a run game coordinator, and I'll have that guy help me and I'll argue with that guy, but we'll come to some type of an agreement and put it all together. I think there's value in that. There's humility in that. And I really, really appreciate that about Kliff. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I've really appreciated his pressers this year, which you only get so much in a press conference. You guys get so much more, and they're just different, more intimate conversations in these production meetings. So it's very cool to hear him kind of come off that way in that setting as well. I am curious because you talked a lot about how it was at the start of Arizona, right? I think by the end of his time in Arizona, he had figured some of that out. His run game by the end of Arizona, a lot of people were like, that's actually looks a lot better. And like James Conrad, I think his last year, like a 1,300-yard season. Right. So he clearly figured something out. So I'm curious, as you unwound that conversation with him, where Anthony comes in and Bobby Johnson and some of the other coaches on the staff to take the things he had figured out by the end of Arizona to the level that they're at now.
Right. I think most of it, what Kliff was talking about, was the mentality of it. And you have to understand, like, I think the best coaches, and I really believe this, the best coaches do a phenomenal job of understanding other people's problems. Like, empathy is a really important aspect of life in general. And a lot of times as coaching and coaching staffs, you know what your problems are. I know what my issues are for my guys, right? But you have to have an understanding of what everybody's issues are, and so there's truly some empathy that's developed in kind of understanding, like, hey, man, if we don't do this well, this thing is going to suffer, and there's this chain reaction that goes through that, and so Anthony Lynn, having been on, those Bronco teams that I was on, that we rushed for, 1,700, 1,900, 2,000-yard rusher, all those things that we did year after year after year, Anthony was part of that. And so he knows the value of that. He knows the value of having receivers that aren't prima donnas that will actually get involved and block people. He understands the value of having a tight end that can line up at the Y, in line right next to the tackle and actually block people. He knows the value of all those things. And he understands the mentality of how that grinds on a defense. The other thing he understands is that, hey, man, don't get so upset with a 2 or 3 yard gain if that 2 or 3 yard gain is having a purpose, and that purpose is wearing people out. And so I'll go back to that game against Cincinnati where they hung 38 points or whatever they did on Cincinnati. 38.
Yeah.
In that game, Brian Robinson had 33 yards rushing, but he had 16 carries. Do you know how many coaches would throw up their hands after 6 carries at 2 yards a carry and go, screw it, like there's nothing we can do?
Right.
And they'd end the game with 8 or 9 carries. And then what Anthony brings is, the value of that, the play action we got, the one-on-one matchups we got at that very end, they bring straight zero coverage on us, right? And Terry McLaurin beats the corner for the touchdown. Like the value of running the ball and continuing to be consistent with attempts. Dan Quinn brought up something in the broadcast that brought up something in the meeting that we used a lot in the broadcast, was this term of 55. And it's an old West Coast thing. It was 50 back in my day, but it's 55 now. And it was 55 rushing attempts with completions. So if you can get to the number 55, like you're going to win games. You're going to possess the ball. You're going to control the clock. You're going to control the tempo and the flow of the game. You're going to keep your defense off the field. If we can hit 55 combined rushes with completions, like we're going to win. And we're going to win a lot of games. And over the last 3 weeks with their 3 wins, they were like, they were like at 52, 58, and I think they were close to 60 last week. And so you look at what they're doing, and they've got a formula for how they're going to win. The other thing that was really cool, just speaking of that formula and Dan Quinn, like Dan Quinn understands some of the issues that they have on the defensive side of the ball. They're trying to figure out their cornerback position. They've got some issues on that back end. They've got some issues on the edge right now with pass rushers and things of that nature. So they know they've got some weaknesses. Actually, Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne are not playing great football right now. They have not been as productive as we've grown to see them. They've given up big plays up the middle of the football field. They've given up a lot of traps, a lot of whams, a lot of things that they've got to clean their games up on, right? And so they haven't played their best football inside. And that's concerning. And Dan Quinn understands that. So he also went from the standpoint of going, hey, man, I know the defensive deficiencies we have. I know the big plays that we've given up. So that's why you're going to see me go for it on 4th down. That's why you're going to see me turn it over to the offense, knowing that, hey, man, we're going to have trouble stopping some teams. Therefore, if we can stay on the football field and we can trust our offense and we believe that we've got a great scheme, a great package, and a unbelievable young quarterback, like that's what we're going to do. And so you've seen Dan Quinn err on the side of being uber aggressive in those situations, partly because he has so much belief in his quarterback and his offensive system. But a lot of it's because, he doesn't have that same belief in the defense right now. So he's coaching the game. Like a lot of defensive coaches coach the game to protect their defense, and he's coaching the game based on what's it going to take us to win today, understanding that I have some defensive deficiencies that I'm going to have to overcome.
Mark Schlereth with us here on the Hoffman Show, of course, the host of the Stinkin' Truth podcast and analyst for the NFL on Fox. And he's got 3 Super Bowl rings, which doesn't feel like a thing I should say last, but it feels silly not to say it. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Mark, in terms of the conversations that you had with the staff, is you had them week 2 after Jayden has an okay debut. Clearly, with the benefit of hindsight, his worst game of the season. He only threw for 200 yards and didn't turn the football over and things that are generally pretty good for a rookie. But you have him after week 1, and then you have him after what he does against Cincinnati. How different were the conversations with Kliff and with Dan and anybody else you talked to about Jayden and where he is so quickly? And then how did those play into what you saw him do in the game?
Yeah, like the same kid I got over to the hotel Saturday morning. I had a meeting with Kliff at 7:30 a.m. And so I got over there at 7:15, whatever. I had a cup of coffee, and sit down in a meeting room with Kliff and our crew, and we just started talking about it. And he's like, I'm sitting in my office, this makeshift office at 5:30 in the morning, and who pops his head in at 5:30 straight up is Jayden Daniels. Hey, what are you going over? Like, he's a junkie. He is a football junkie. And it's just reps, 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 preparation, 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 understanding like the kid's level of football consumption. Like, he can't get enough. And he's constantly repping it and working it, mental reps, physical reps, whatever he can get. Like, that kid is on it. Like, he is working it. And so, but the big thing to me was watching this dramatic, and he was really good in this first game, all things considered. There were 3 or 4, maybe 5 plays I found where he turned down automatic completions to take off and run. And so I had that conversation with him, like, dude, what are you thinking? Yeah, we can't do that. I just didn't trust it. I didn't read it out. I just got antsy. I took whatever it was. To watch him on film every week get exponentially better at those decisions, and then to hear Kliff talk about how we're creating drills so his eyes don't drop, and so he continues to, even as he tackling a line of scrimmage because he's getting loose, like he's still trying to go through the progressions and get downfield and figure out who's on the scramble drill. And so they worked on all these drills to make sure they help keep solidifying those things. And you have watched him become the guy that only runs when he has to, not because he can. And he's done that in 4 weeks.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Which is when your default mechanism, and I'm not saying this because I think he's a quarterback first, but normally when your default mechanism is from the neck down, meaning I'm just going to rely on athleticism, it just doesn't change. That's who you are. That's always
and
going
it's
to
not
be
like he
what
wasn't
things.
successful doing it, right? Like he scrambled for 80 plus yards and moved the chains and like was
Yeah,
successful running. So it's not like he figured out
right,
that he couldn't do it in the league. He just changed
right.
anyway.
Yeah, but he just understood for longevity, and he took that
Right.
shot against the Giants where I
Yeah.
thought he broke all his ribs. He said he just got the air knocked out of him, he couldn't breathe. But I'm like, that was one of those shots where you think twice about how often do I want to run this ball, like because these guys are dangerous on the other side of the field. But to watch him to make that adjustment mentally and get over that, like that's been incredible. And then just watching the connection between he and Terry McLaurin, and I just thought that was phenomenal. Quick, while I'm on Terry McLaurin, let me just give you just a little, because you're going to love this. So I am talking to Jonathan Gannon, former coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles, now the head coach of Arizona. And Jonathan and I are very friendly, like Dan and I are. We're good buddies. Um, and we're just talking about McLaurin being an issue, a problem. And he's like, in all my years in Philly, he's like, we didn't hesitate. They had Darius Slay, they had, Bradbury, they had good corners, good cover corners. You go, never hesitated to lock up my corners one on one in man to man coverage. And it didn't matter who the guy was. Just everybody in the league. We just go, hey, you got this guy. You're wearing the hat. Tonight you're wearing the hat. You got it. One guy we didn't do it with, Terry McLaurin. Terry just tore us up. And he's just like, I have so much respect for him. Not only his speed, his toughness, but his route running and how he sets people up. Like, he is a guy that you cannot give one-to-one coverage, one-on-one coverage in, because he will eat you alive. And I thought it was really interesting, like the respect factor for Terry McLaurin, who obviously everybody says, oh, yeah, really good receiver, right? But he's been doing it year in, year out with a plethora of different quarterbacks, a bunch of also-rans. And to have that level of respect based upon who the quarterbacks have been, I found very, very interesting about just the way they felt. Because I've always thought that Terry McLaurin was vastly underrated. But I think I probably underrated how underrated he is.
Yeah, no, that's a great anecdote. And I was still on the beat Terry's rookie year, and I remember like in training camp that first year, like, man, this guy's really good. Like, I don't think he's gonna be the special teams guy they drafted him to be. And next thing
Right.
you know, Gruden pulls him out of the preseason games, and then he goes out his first game against the Eagles and scores twice. And you're like, oh no, that camp stuff was real. So that was he always has had the Eagles numbers.
Yeah.
That is both surprising because it's like, but what about Justin Jefferson? But also unsurprising considering what Terry's done to the Eagles over the years.
Yeah, no question about it. So it's been that was a revelation for me because, like I said, I always knew that he was really good, but I probably just didn't have I no understand the level of respect some coordinators have for Terry McLaurin. And you hear it all the time. Anytime you face him, you got to shut down 17. Blah blah blah. Got to figure out a plan. Um, but that was real. There's no question about it.
Mark Schlereth, you can catch the Stinkin' Truth podcast. The rest of his notebook gets emptied there. And of course, they'll do a preview of this coming weekend on the Thursday show. You can also catch him on a brand new show with Fox with my pal Danny Parkins, amongst others on that cast and crew. And then, of course, NFL on Fox on Sundays. Mark, always a pleasure, sir. We'll do it again later this year.
My pleasure. Great to be with you, man. Take care.
This is The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.